Great.
Okay, gang, we're going to get started. This is going to be our first trial run with regard to Western New York Pride. We're going to kind of come through this. Over the last couple of weeks, obviously, we've talked about this idea. John and I were out of town over the last couple of weeks for various things. But what we're going to try to do today is we're going to take an idea, we're going to press it down in regard to the ideas of what it was that we've learned in the renovation line of thinking. Here are the things that we value. And we're going to start dialoguing, and we're going to see where we land at the end of this. John has also, just in case you're looking for what are we talking about when we list this term or this idea, this is just fresh reminders for people in regard to the renovation line of thinking, but also in terms of definitions and terms. And then John wanted to speak as well in regard to just our desire to basically burrow through an idea like this in one session and the reason why.
Right, so we really do feel that within an hour we can easily talk through these concepts. So the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish that is if we keep it at a high level. So we're not wanting to dig in at each ministry level and say, okay, we think that at this minutia we want to talk about how you're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's not that. It's really establishing high-level concepts, and then everybody here has a designated role in a domain that you are responsible for. So the expectation is that you are going to work within that domain, and we're just going to be providing some higher level ideas. So as we've talked about in the past, the whole goal of having this whole team together is for us to leverage the experience in the room. So it doesn't mean that I'm expecting one person to then take over for the other within their own domain. It's really about how can we leverage the experience and give each other new ideas and talk through some things. So that's really where we're going to land.
Yeah, and that's ultimately, like, if you were to ask us what's a win, I think that's a win. If this creates some new ideas, if it shows us some blind spots, and it serves as an impetus for you to get with other people in this room outside of this time, or other churches outside of this time, I think that's a win, a tangible win, because at the end of the day, I mean, there's autonomy in our job description, and so we want for that to happen. Can I pray real quick, and then we'll kind of dive in? Is that cool?
No prayer.
All right, no prayer. Well, God, we just thank you for this time, Lord. I pray that this would be helpful. It would be a fruitful endeavor for us. I pray that we will discover things that perhaps we're not seeing along the way. And then also I pray, Lord, that you would create just a healthy spirit in this room, one that is willing to give each of us the benefit of the doubt and trust that we're trying to help and move an idea forward, not simply poke holes in it for the sake of making it look bad. In your holy and precious name, we pray. Amen. Okay, so here's what I want to start with. If you remember from the last couple of weeks, like the first thing that we talk about with, Dwight calls them qualitative thresholds, but in essence, like what we're looking at is we want to look at what's the essence of greater body partnership. So when we talk about that in particular, we're not talking inside, we're talking outside. What is going on from representation of this church out to the other bodies of Christ that are expressed in Western New York? Interdependence, we're talking internally, okay, and some externally too, because if it's a joint partnership, and we want that to look. And then geographic specificity. So what does that look like with regard to our intentionality in our demography? We've gone through like pluses and minuses. What were some benefits? And maybe what are ways to improve? And so I think that's really where we can serve one another, is talking about some of the strengths, but also how can we improve on this. And this will serve as a launching pad for May 8th when we get together with the other churches. I believe that it's at the Apex on May 8th at 2 to 3:30. So, all right. In terms of greater body partnership, when you think about Western New York Pray, let's talk about some of the positives and perhaps some of the negatives to what we learned from that endeavor. What would we say?
How many churches were we able to partner with?
We had direct partnership with 20 expressions of the bride outside of this church, so 20 churches total.
Was there a larger number we were shooting for?
That's a great question. No, we were kind of sending it out and just seeing where it went. My understanding is that in the past, Western New York Pray was in conjunction with a couple of other churches, I believe 2 to 3 tops, but I was not aware of any others above and beyond that. So, yeah, about 20 churches.
So compared to what we've done in the past, it sounds like Good.
Okay,
Plus.
yeah, for sure.
I'm exhausted, that's all I have to add.
All right,
I'm done for the session.
okay.
But how many churches are we partnered with in the region?
That have exposure to renovation ideas at varying degrees, there's 110.
Okay.
So about 1/6, 1/5, 1/6 of the total population of churches, so.
And were most of those churches in that 20, or those 20 comprise of most churches in the network, or how many are kind of outside of the renovation?
16 of the, that's great. 16 of the 20 were in the network, 4 partners that are not officially, we wouldn't say they've officially gone through renovation thinking. So, yeah, good.
Did you get a sense of shared leadership once we got the thing going? Once we actually got it going, there was some other leadership rising out of this thing, and it wasn't just us?
Yeah, no, and that was, I'm going to put that in here as an improvement, so shared leadership. Some of that was time constrained, but the reality was definitely churches took the ball, but if you would say, like, where was everybody looking for the impetus of communication, you know, it would be on us. So I would say that there's definitely, like, my experience would be, like, I think there's some cool shared leadership opportunities that we could do better moving forward, so that's great. Yeah, absolutely.
So relative to the time period that they were given to demonstrate leadership, it was good. Relative to what it could have been, had there been more on the front end given them time, it could have been better.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah. And I would say time was a big variable in that, but even still, like, people were looking for us, like, website development, new videos, tell us what to do next, the manual itself.
Yeah.
And we happily took that on, but I'm saying, hey, if we move forward, what could that look like if we distribute that a little bit better moving forward? I think that's a great point.
But it's not as much that no one stepped up, it's just we didn't invite them in early.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's great.
Right, timing was a big
Sure.
concern, because we were talking about it in this group in November. We ended up communicating to them right around Christmas time, which is obviously a tough time frame. So we didn't give them much opportunity, so that's something to pay attention
Yeah,
to.
it's good. You can look at any one of these. You know, interdependence, we're talking about how did we work together with one another in this church, and geographic specificity. So we're in this column, but you can speak to any one of these three based on, and again, this is your perspective. So there's really not a wrong, you know, unless there's something biblically heretical about what you say, there's really not a wrong answer. At which point Wes will condemn you, and we will stone you outside of this room.
The shunning will begin.
Yes.
So.
If you've ever read the book The Lottery, or the short story The Lottery.
Well, go ahead, no, go ahead.
For interdependence, from improvement from the previous year,
Yeah.
there definitely was significant more communication between everyone.
Okay,
And at least there was the understanding that this was a chapel-wide thing. you know.
Okay.
So, you know, definitely better. I don't want to say better because it wasn't the point the year before, correct? I mean, it was owned by women's ministry and just kind of
yeah,
people were invited.
yeah, okay. So like we had a little bit more of a chapel-centric, or a chapel-wide communicative flow. Okay, cool.
So if you graph the 20 churches from a location standpoint, where was the geography primarily when you look at those 20?
Yeah, man, it was all over. There definitely wasn't like, hey, Western New York Pray 2012, let's intentionally engage North Tonawanda. You know, it was basically, who can we get that would early adopt to this idea? So anybody who's a yes, we're excited. But it literally went from as far east as Batavia, is that east and south, right? All the way up to Niagara Falls, Lewiston area. So it ran the gamut.
Now, Lockport had a strong presence from multiple churches,
Yeah.
where other communities didn't necessarily have multiple churches engaged. Lockport had 6, 7 plus of
Yeah.
that 20. You know, there was a good representation from that.
And we think Lima was a big part of that, which was that's a greater body partner, Lockport Evangelical Ministers Association.
But within that, I mean, from a geographic perspective, there were some gaps. I mean, there were some larger churches within, you know, let's take the south towns. Some areas we did have great exposure, and other areas we didn't. So there are some large pockets that I think, you know, from a partnership perspective, we can probably engage some other churches, more intentionally engage those churches to say, we want to make sure there's a better coverage here.
you attribute that still more towards the fact that from a time perspective, that we just weren't able to get up? I mean, if we had an extra month or so, being more intentional with them would have been much significantly easier.
I think
Possibly.
I think it could have been, but I also think like we just didn't ask the question either,
Mhm.
you know? So like I know like I put larger churches on board. Like you understand, I'm not just about church size, but man, if the Tabernacle and Hamburg Wesleyan would have jumped on this, I thought that could have been awesome for the South Towns. We do have existing partnerships with them in Reno. We've helped to plant Northgate Church, was a joint venture of a lot of churches in that. So I would have, you know, some of it is we're guessing, but we also didn't ask the question. So
I think that's a harder question in general too, because I'm basing this on our Christmas partnerships and those things, the whole do good thing.
okay,
That was kind of a nightmare from just everyone understanding who was responsible for what. And I think maybe the same here, how we get at a better conversation up front of who's going to take what and lead what.
okay,
I think that's part of the gray area, especially in the logistical side of things. You have that conversation, well, who's doing that? Well, the assumption is we will if nobody else does. You know, it's just kind of, and then sometimes if someone says, hey, I'll take it and run with it, we go, wait a second, we didn't discuss this. So I think there's almost
Okay.
well, I've sensed almost kind of a fear to jump out in front unless there's been a good conversation. So,
Well, you walk a fine line with that though too, because we even talked in this room about, you know, do we want to run down a path where we are dictating a lot of what's being done within multiple contexts? Or do we approach it saying, we're going to lead and kind of provide some high-level guidance. If you want to do it the same way that we're doing, great. If you don't, then you have freedom within your context to do whatever you want.
but I think that model does lend itself more to we're going to do it, join if you want, versus hey, do you want to help us to help the rest? You know, I think that's more so instead of hey, here are some guidelines, do it in your own context. That's more they're going to do it for themselves as opposed to do it for the whole. You know, so.
Can I add one real quick?
Excuse me, one question. Does there need to be another level here? Does there need to be, besides the chapel level and all the other churches level, and we can say we're all first among equals, but as John was saying, we have this tendency to take the lead, or if we don't, they expect us to take the lead. And there's confusion about fear about jumping ahead. Does there need to be a mid-level of significant, word significant's not the right word, but significant partners, like Tommy Reed, like Jerry, like these people who, instead of the chapel, maybe chapel's still the driving force, but in getting together with these people, selling them on it, and then you have many more people doing buy-in.
It could be. I mean, it could be. I'm not 100% sure. But maybe on the back side of this, like as we process through this, maybe we do arrive that, hey, that's something like, we're going to put some takeaways or questions or key discoveries. That might be one that we discover as we process through that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Pastor Bob, you had something.
Just a little different take on
Okay.
exactly the same thing is it important to have a pre-existing relationship so that when something like this comes up, you will know already that we know the people, we have a relationship with them. I realize that you have to start a relationship at some point. But I mean, just to start out and say, we've got this great big program, here's what we're going to do, here's what we'd like to see, versus, you know, using the renovation network approach and establishing those relationships in advance. Just having a basic understanding in advance before we introduce a specific program.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I mean, I would say that, I guess like what my personal opinion is, I would look to the network first, and
Right,
here's why.
right.
Because I've had my the door slammed on me at a number of churches that we've just tried to come alongside and just say, hey, what do you think about this? And so it's not to say that can't grow, because I think you're right. Like I think that there are some churches that adopt to this early, and then there are others that are like, man, I just want to kick the tires or smell what's cooking a little bit before I know one way or the other. And maybe there's some value to going cycling back with some of these other churches and just checking. So,
Well, that's even a conversation for another time too, around how the network operates and when do we engage, when do we not, and so that's actually the topic that we're going to talk about in this room at some point in time.
okay. I'm going to put Pastor Bob. I'm going to put conversation and cycling back with other churches as.
I have a question. What's Jeffrey, which we're talking about? The geographic one, number 3. What's the goal? I mean, you say this is what we're shooting for. This is the A answer. This is it. What is that for us?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I mean, we're saying Western New York, so our goal is really
So every
that
church
region.
in Western New York, that's our goal.
I would say so, like mobilizing the body of every bride toward prayer for a concentrated period of time. I think that's a fair, that's something that we'd say that's a big win, but even a critical mass of churches would be huge too.
Okay.
So like if you were to pin me like on a number, like let's say next year, if we did this again next year, if that was 50, I'd be fired up.
Right.
I don't know that we're ever going to get the whole 110, but man, if we move the ball from 20 to 50, and again, I know that's just a numbers thing, but it is somewhat of a metric. I would be fired up about that. I would be more fired up to figure out how we got the 50, meaning if 20 of the 50 were born out of what you all have out there with other churches, that would, I mean, I would be through the roof ecstatic.
So are we looking at specific geography then? Like, are we mapping out different, locations and say, hey, we'd like to have at least one church here in this region, I mean, is that?
We did not do that this year.
I think that's something for us to consider. So when you take into consider, the larger churches being on board, where can we leverage influence, like Bob was mentioning, to help to specifically target parts of the region so that we have a better view of the whole.
I like that, Wes. Like it's not really about necessarily the size, but like, within Western New York, are there 40 key towns or cities that we're saying, yeah, like I think of like Titus when it talks about appointing elders over the city. Like there's Jerusalems within the Jerusalem. You know what I mean? I like that idea, and we did not think about that at all. Yeah, that's good. This is helpful, by the way. I mean, this is. Can I just, I want to throw something out here. I would say, I do think we have better communication chapel-wide. What I would say, if you were to ask me, what was the general level of excitement in comparison from our church to other churches? My personal opinion is at this leadership level that other churches were more excited about what we were doing. And they were more willing to get in the communicative loop on, for instance, just stories. Like, what were the stories that came out of this? I know a couple of times we asked people, hey, do you know of any stories? And if you looked at the Western New York Pray video that John put together, it's not that the chapel's non-existent in that, but I would say like just the overall level of excitement and communication back to us was much more readily received outside of us than inside. Is that okay to say? Fair to say?
Do you have a theory on that? Why? I'll put it on you instead of on me.
Sure. Thank you for playing the devil's advocate. I really don't know. I don't. I mean, I don't know if it's that maybe it's like nobody really knows who's owning it directly, and therefore we're going to stand back and let it be. And it's not that. Here's what I would say: there wasn't any level of hostility toward the idea, but there certainly didn't appear to feel like, man, I want to jump in on this. Like, I've got a crew of people in my ministry, and here's what we're going to do. Now, that happened in some cases. I'm not saying it was, non-existent. But I think, like, it's almost like everyone's responsibility is no one's responsibility, and we all kind of, it's like an innocent bystander effect, where something happens, and because there's a lot of us, people assume somebody's going to jump in and take it, and then we're okay. Does that make sense?
Personally, I look at, men's ministry as understanding it, but not totally understanding it.
Okay.
But we're already down the road, so how do I integrate something in it? But I understand it, but not totally. But having seen it, now I see where, coming back to it in 2012, where I can incorporate the guys into those types of things and look for those stories and so forth. But by the time I had a better grasp of it, the train was already out, and then it would have just seemed more like, hey, just tell me a story.
Okay, that's fair.
And what was the contribution of the staff in terms of preparing the booklet?
Yeah.
Is that significant?
In terms of a devotional, that's where we would have partnership. So we definitely had some devotional, and that was internal and external. So the composition of the devotional, that we had some play internally on that, and externally. So I'm going to put that in both. I think that is a win, Pastor Rich. But I think that above and beyond that, I don't know that I saw as much, but that's absolutely a win within this, was that almost every ministry here contributed to the composition of that devotional, and that is a win. Yeah, that's a positive.
So I think it's just an opportunity for us, as we're going into the next cycle, to say, how can we more clearly outline what the expectations are? Now that everybody knows what it looks like and kind of what we're marching toward, how can we look to integrate that even more? Now I know, some of the ministries represented here, they were saying, okay, how can I do this? How can I reach out? And we talked about that initially, but again, we were kind of stepping into this saying, well, we don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, and let's shape it as we go. So I think this upcoming cycle, we can look at it and say, all right, what can I do to intentionally engage this within my ministry?
Yeah. Let me do this real quick. I want to take about 2 more minutes on this section. Again, I'm just trying to create a baseline of what would an exercise like this look like. So giving it 60 minutes. 2 more minutes on here, and then we're going to go down to the more personal formation level stuff, and then we'll get into missional behavior. So,
Dion, were you going to say something?
Dion, yeah.
And this could be just me, but I think as far as number 2, part of the, and I've mentioned this to John, the concerns that I had was that the experience of getting there, the Thursday meetings,
Okay.
was in some ways frustrating, in the sense that if we're at ground zero and we're moving forward, we get to a 2, and then the next meeting we're back on 1, and then we go to 3, and then we're backward, and it became a little bit confusing to me in spending. We probably spent 7 or 8 meetings on that.
Okay.
And so I thought maybe by the time we had clarity to what we were going to do, then it was kind of like too late to really. We talked about timing already.
Yeah.
If we're going to, I know we're getting better at the process through this what we're doing right now, but maybe if we had started the process a little bit earlier, then we wouldn't have been. We would have been more on target as to what our responsibility is.
I think that's fair. I think that contributes to that. It's clear that time as a variable was a big part of some of the rush on this. I think that's a good thing to just say, hey, that's a key takeaway from. But I agree. I definitely there's kind of like a give and a flow on. Hey, I think we move forward, then we step back. I think that's fair.
I mean, I honestly, I know. Sorry.
No.
My expectation was, or my understanding was, it was as we started it, that the women's ministry was going to be driving Western New York Pray, and we were joining her.
Okay.
Or joining them, I should say. And it took a while for me to understand that was not going to be the case.
Okay. That's good. I'm going to put how the idea assimilates. It'll help me because I'm going to take pictures and try and that helps. All right, why don't we Joe, you had a point you wanted to throw in there?
Oh, I got a quick question.
Okay.
You guys are getting together on May 8th
Yeah.
to talk about this?
Yeah.
Just for shared partnership, with planning, it would help. Are you guys going to maybe determine a time frame for the following year that you're thinking about targeting? Because if we have that in advance, I start planning stuff sometimes in the summer. I usually plan in the summer.
Yeah.
That would help me.
Okay.
Just would help the staff, I'm sure, but it also would help me personally. Not that I didn't partner, we did it with the students, but
yeah,
I could better coordinate many messages or just preparing leaders. Especially if you're going to meet in May, if you guys have a time frame, that would help.
Yeah. What's probably going to happen? May we're going to get together. We're going to debrief, kind of similar to this, okay? But there's probably going to be another meeting that comes after that where, hey, would you all be willing to get together as we talk about next year? And I think maybe 2013 will be a great. We'll look back and we'll celebrate some of these things. But yeah.
Can I say one thing real fast?
Yeah, sure.
I think also we talked a lot about mechanisms for churches praying for one another, having visibility for that. We did Skype and those kind of things.
Yeah.
But a lot of that, even we had prayer requests on the website and those things. But I don't think we did a lot. I think we could do more to up that visibility. Just in the sense that if you post a request or whatever on the website, that all of the churches participating will be praying for that. Churches will be praying for each other. Just some way for, instead of it being, each church elevates the idea of prayer in their own context, but also just prayer amongst themselves.
Okay, cool. Let's transition just to keep the flow going for try to nail this out in 60 minutes. Super helpful feedback, gang. Thank you. John, why don't you jump in on this? Okay, so this is where Dwight talks about thresholds, okay, as a church. Now we're getting into spiritual formation. I know that within the network of renovation, there's 5 that we look at. In our church, we look at 4, okay? So I'm going to play by our church rules, even though I prefer to play by the 5 rule. So, but we're going to do this one. So John, why don't you jump in?
All right, so under spiritual formation, how would we feel that Western New York Pray, approached the topic of intimacy with God? How do we feel it influenced that positively or negatively? Okay. Joe?
About having the booklet and having the email was a great tool for accessibility. Having stuff that tech put together, that email that got sent out every day was a great, at least, resource for accessibility.
I'm still amazed at how many people use the prayer wall. I think that in and of itself, just whether or not that increased intimacy or whether it was just us seeing that,
Right.
it was cool.
Okay.
And I think the concert of prayer was also another just encouraging to see how people showed up with that.
Do we know if other churches as well did prayer walls of some type, and any feedback from what they saw on their walls?
There are a handful that did, but they looked differently in each
Sure, yeah.
in each context.
Yeah,
So,
might be
like
interesting.
Restoration did, I know
Yeah.
they did one,
Yeah.
and that was unique. But people were engaging with that as
Right,
well.
so that's probably something interesting to talk about in the meeting with all the other churches that did do that and what they saw and experienced through it.
Yep. What else? Where were there opportunities that we could have, encouraged greater intimacy with God through Western New York Pray, and we possibly missed it?
Well, going back to just from the positive side, I mean, that Sunday was just fantastic here. So I kind of look at that in terms of intimacy with God, that Sunday, the kickoff that Sunday. The initial, yeah.
Concerts prayer.
Yeah, the Sunday night
concert
gathering.
prayer, yeah. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I know that the Well did, and I know some other churches do around the country, is a Good Friday, like from 12 o'clock to 3, you have a culmination of this prayer time where people can come in on their own and go do personal communion, or go to this station, read for this, or this station for that, all with music playing, with lighting, some sort of video playing in the background, creating an atmosphere of meditation and prayer, which is almost culminating now we did it in a service, at night, and that's fine. And I think there's some people do that service at night, but some people also do the 12 to 3 things. That'd be another thing that could be added.
So you're saying, as we're closing out Western New York Pray, having something that feels similar to the kickoff?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sure, bookend it. Or maybe not, I don't know.
That's a good, it's a suggestion. It's interesting because I think, I heard the Well was doing that, and I think Restoration did something similar, but it's almost like the evangelical Stations of the Cross. Like if you were Catholic,
Yeah.
it was like you know what I mean? Like I remember as an altar boy doing that, and it was powerful. And there was some like meditative, redemptive component of what did Jesus go through at this moment,
My son does it in Nashville too. It's incredibly powerful in terms of being holy. And it's individual. And some people just come in with their family, with their kids, and have these moments with their kids.
Let me just add, as John's writing here, I just want to add, don't feel like there are times that we'll go through this, and we might hit on one of these things, and we're like, I don't know that this was really directly going to contribute to that. It's okay to get there on this. Don't feel like you just have to come up with something. Because sometimes when we do these things, we realize, well, this wasn't really designed for this component of it, but we should always ask the question, because if it is something we should be responsible for, then we need to go through that. So just to remind, Jonathan.
I probably would have liked to have used the back of the sermon note sheet in some way.
It's good.
And I just didn't either spend enough time thinking about it or have enough creative ideas for how to do that. But I'd be open to use it. it's free space.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Okay.
Also, I wonder if there's an opportunity to create like a family-friendly devotional or something where parents and kids can do something together. I think the devotional we had was good, but not necessarily geared toward children or, younger kids, that we can create something for that.
That's a good point, yeah.
I agree with that too.
I know there are a couple of families that I knew that were going through it, and they said like it's helpful, but on the kid level, it's tough for the kids a little bit.
How about on the relationship front? So Christ-like relationships. What did Western New York Pray do to
Raising awareness with praying for each other. I think people, even if they didn't write anything on the wall, they were going by to see what they could pray for. I think that's a cool thing.
Did we have any kind of emphasis in like small groups or anything like that for like prayer during this time, or was it all driven through the devotional stuff?
For like lifelines?
Yeah.
I just basically did a communication video walking them through the Western New York Pray website. The tough part with that currently is I just communicate with hosts. We're going to do a group's Facebook page to where I'll be able to communicate what I do to everyone who's involved in groups, because then it's at the discretion of the host, do they pass that on. But I did a communication video saying, hey, can I remind you, here's what's going on. I actually had a screenshot of scrolling through the Western New York Prayer website, if you look available, what's going on. Because we don't, what's that? What we don't, because the groups don't all do the same things, like it's not every group, like now we're going through this curriculum. They're all at different places with different curriculum, so it's not like, now we're gonna pause this and we're all gonna talk about prayer for X number of weeks, so. I definitely think with the increased potential to communicate to people who are just in groups will just help, just that ability. You know what I mean? Because whatever's going on, to communicate through that avenue would definitely help.
Sorry, I was just writing something, a note for me.
What else?
Would we say like for gifting, for instance, was this an opportunity for us to like where we found out that people came alive in your ministry domains and you weren't aware that prayer was one of their things? Was anything like that kind of emerged in terms of helping people develop an awareness of their gifting and what makes them come alive?
Brian, while I can't answer that question, it is the same question that I've been wrestling with too. I think, has this impacted an individual's prayer life? I know it's probably impossible to measure statistically, but anecdotally, there might be a few things that this changed the way I pray. This changed how much I pray. This changed the things I pray for. This opened my eyes to the communication, all the aspects of prayer. The praying part, the listening part, the receiving part, the praise part. And we've talked a lot about the events and the mechanics of it. I'm just wondering, what did it mean to the people involved? Did their intimacy with God increase? Has it had a lasting impact? I don't know how to measure some of these, but it certainly is a question that I would like to explore.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, that was the purpose of the whole thing, is to get people to pray and get them involved in their own prayer needs and others, and pray for other people and give praise in response to answers to prayer.
Yeah.
And did it, has it changed people in terms of what we were doing? We invested a lot in this, and has it had a lasting impact on?
What if I do this? Like, what if I add that as a question? Like, is there a metric or an idea that we should consider on the back end of this, just to see where people are at? Maybe is that fair?
Did it change your?
Okay.
I'm sure it did, and some people.
The one thing that I noticed from our women, everybody writes emails, but I have had a flood and a ton of emails about praying. I've been praying. Let me know the next request. I am praying. Like I've never had before since I've been here. I mean, quite accelerated of activeness of praying and sharing prayer requests in communication all around, which I think will be really cool when we do it on Facebook. but
Okay.
a surmountable increase this year.
See, I did not see any insignificant increase in the prayer emails that come into the prayer@thechapel.com. It's been about the same,
Okay.
which is good. I mean, they're all good, and we get 15 to 30 of them a week.
Yeah.
It's good, but it wasn't like it went up 50% or 10%.
Okay. What else? Other things in this domain, again, you can hit on, if there's something contributing to awareness of one's grace story that was developed here, or maybe not. I mean, we don't have to force an idea to fit, but we want to make sure that we touch on all of these levels and see what thoughts come up.
With the devotional itself, the website, what have you, do you think it encouraged people, beyond just praying for each other, do you think that it encouraged them to try and get the booklet into people's hands, or to talk more about the concept of prayer with others? Do you have examples, or do you think that went well, or do you think there's opportunity there as well?
I think there's opportunity there, but I think it, to the degree that you can measure it went well. I mean, I'm just going by the number of times I'd always have to come, and replenish our stock of devotionals at the Apex. So, I mean, if someone grabbed one day, and, I mean, they're probably not gonna grab another for themselves, and another for themselves.
They might.
They might.
They might.
But, we're always replenishing those, and they're taking them, so
Yeah.
you'd think that either they're taking them for themselves, or someone else is coming back to give one to another person, so you don't know exactly, but I was always replenishing it.
I mean, is that something that we can better expound on next year, even as far as what to do with this time? I mean, it sounds to me like a lot of people have a lot of feedback on the intimacy with God portion, and that to me says that people engaging in it thought of it as a very personal thing and didn't think in context of, well, how do I then take that and share with others or whatever?
Yeah.
Is there a way to?
Well, even as just a rudimentary example, in the video, the girl she's on the plane, I think,
Yeah.
and she's talking with the lady, and she doesn't want to give it up, but she feels compelled to. She's being honest,
Right.
But the reality is, like, if we did give that away to an unbeliever, do we need to be thinking about them as well as the believer, so that if they got it, like, let's say it's a form of evangelization toward the gospel, maybe there's a part of that we are not thinking about. And I thought about that in the video, where I'm like, I wonder if, like, as she gave it to her,
That's a good point.
did she have context, or I mean, we could also land in the position of, what, the word of God does not need help, like sometimes we think it does. That if the Spirit is moved, so there's a fine balance there, but I think it's worth asking.